Hello everybody and welcome to the Gaming Grappler. You know, I'm a big From Software fan, but if I'm going to be honest with you guys, I, like many other From Software fans out there, have severely neglected the Armored Core franchise. And last year at the Game Awards, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon was finally announced. And I got this revitalized interest in the series, mostly because I really do enjoy Armored Core's tone and aesthetic. I like that, unlike many other mecha properties out there, where the mechs are meant to be cool and sell toys, the mechs in Armored Core look like giant humanoid death machines. These things are avatars of war, not toys. And that's a really cool premise that I really enjoy. Now, having said that, if you're new to the franchise like I am, it can be incredibly daunting to get into, and for a number of reasons. The worst reason being the price point. Let me explain. Most Armored Core games were primarily made to be console exclusive, and as a result of that console exclusivity, a lot of them aren't in print anymore. They're not in circulation. If you want to buy a physical copy of one of these older games, you have to go to the aftermarket, and the aftermarket prices are inflated to shit. Like, there's a copy of Verdict Day right now on Amazon that is over $200. I mean, it's not reasonable in the slightest. You know, I got a copy of Armored Core 5 sitting on my shelf right now, and thank God I bought that game over 10 years ago when it actually came at a reasonable price point. And you got to factor in, too, that there are a lot of Armored Core games out there. There are over 20 Armored Core games out there, and some of them are built for their own unique purposes. Like, for example, my copy of Armored Core 5 wouldn't be that suitable to cover on this channel for the sole reason that that game was designed primarily around being an online multiplayer shooter, and I primarily like to cover single-player experiences. So, the game I finally decided to settle upon was Armored Core 4 4A on 3DS. I did manage to find a copy of this game at a reasonable price point. No, it was still overpriced, but at least I got it under $100, which is the most you could ask for at this point in time. And one of the reasons why I picked this game is that it was highly regarded among both fans and critics alike. But the main reason why I picked it was because I hear that this game is the fastest in the franchise. And if you know me, you know I love to go fast in games. My favorite types of games out there are fast-paced experiences. Games like Ultra Kill, Ghost Runner, Vanquish, Doom Eternal. If it runs at a high pace and gets my adrenaline pumping, that's my favorite type of gaming experience. So it was a no-brainer to pick that game for this channel. But before I get started with this review, I gotta get the self-promotion out of the way. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Gaming Grappler. The more this channel grows, the more time, effort, and dedication I can bring into giving you guys content on a consistent and regular basis. And I gotta say, your support has been noted. My previous video got over 5K views, which is a milestone on a channel as small as the one I'm operating right now. Your support gives me the motivation to make sure that my next video is the best video I ever created. So thank you guys, and please enjoy the rest of the video.
2,000 years later.
Let's get into the story and the premise for Armored Core for answer. The game takes place in a post-apocalyptic future full of endless war. And war is no longer being fought by nations or ideologies, but by corporations, primarily for money. It's gotten so bad that the rich live in cradles, giant fortresses floating in the sky that cost a metric ton of money to maintain. While the poor live on the surface of the planet, which is where most of the wars are being fought. And as a result of that constant warfare, the surface of the planet has become polluted and borderline inhospitable. In this universe, the biggest military asset out there are mechs and the people who pilot those mechs. And for those that don't know, a mech is a giant humanoid robot that physically has a human being piloting it and operating it from within. And the main reason why mechs are like that is that from a storytelling perspective, it adds some stakes and some tension to all the action you're seeing on the screen. Sure, there may be a power fantasy element for using and operating a giant robot death machine, but there's also a human element in that you're still a vulnerable human being in that machine and you could die at any moment. And as a result, it adds some stakes and some tension to what you're seeing and what you're playing in the game. Like many mecha properties out there, it has its own unique terminology though. Like a mech in this game is called a next, and a pilot is called a lynx. It doesn't really matter, but the more you know. One thing I got to say about the story in Armored Core for Answer is you can really see Miyazaki's handiwork in the way this game handles plot and story, and that while there are some cutscenes and mission briefings in the game, they are very minimal. Most of what you understand in the game will have to be done from the player actually getting invested into the story, reading item descriptions, and actually being a part of the world. But you can miss a lot of what's happening in the background if you just blaze through the game and don't pay attention to any of it. But like Dark Souls or any of the other Soulsborne games out there are entire YouTube channels out there dedicated to breaking down the lore of Armored Core and what's going on in these games. So just know that the lore and the story is more in the background of this universe than it is being front-loaded. One aspect of this game's story that I enjoyed is that it has a lot in common with Metal Gear Solid 4, and that the concept of a nation barely exists anymore. War is being fought for no purpose other than to keep a war economy up and running. And most events that are happening in the world are being done by these corporations who are shadowy and run things beyond the scenes. They're also the same corporations that have created the mecha parts that you use in the game. So it's a pretty interesting factor of the game's story. Music and sound. I don't think this will be able to sustain its own unique part of the video because I don't have much to say because it's great. The music and the soundtrack for this game is phenomenal. All the tracks are absolute bangers. And it's not like a Dark Souls game where you have choirs and drums and percussion, but it's more modern and futuristic, which is what it should be, and it fits the tone and the style of the game, and it's pretty epic in its own right. And all the weapons that you use are satisfying. They have the right sound effects. They clearly knew what they were doing. So yeah, sound design team gets an A+. You guys knocked it out of the park. I don't have much to say. You guys killed it here. All right, now I want to get the bad out of the way because this wouldn't be a complete review if I didn't speak about what worked and what didn't. Now, I will be keeping this segment pretty brief for the main reason that most of my problems with Armored Core for Answer are more of a result of the time period that this game was released in. This is a 2008 game, and it can show its age in a lot of regards, especially in the graphics and performance department. Now, one of the things that the developers did in fact get right is the design of all the mecha parts and the arms fortresses. And it's the most important thing for them to get right, graphically speaking. Every part of your mech has a distinct look to it that conveys a lot of visual information of the player that they can accurately deduce which part they need for whatever build they're making. Now, what didn't work graphically speaking is the backgrounds and environments. Now, I understand that this is a post-apocalyptic world and everything is destroyed, but a lot of the buildings here look like they were leftover Unity assets, and again, the backgrounds left a lot to be desired. I understand that this is a fast-paced game, and in quick battles you may not even be able to see what's going on, but it's still a bit of a problem because there could have been a little bit of environmental storytelling going on in that regard. So again, that was a missed opportunity. Now, what is a bigger problem is the performance, specifically on the PlayStation 3 version that I'm playing. The frame rate on certain arms fortresses could just die at times. The worst offender is the mission Defeat the Spirit of Mother Will, which on paper should be one of the game's highlights, where the player is being tasked with destroying a giant mechanized spider robot, which that entire sentence just sounds pure video games, but when you actually play it, the frame rate just commits suicide, and if it gets so bad it gets nauseating, which is a bit of a problem because it casts a big negative shadow on a game that otherwise performs just fine. You gotta keep in mind that the main highlight in playing Armored Core are the mecha on mecha fights, where the player will fight other mecha pilots who use the same sort of character customization that the player's using. And when this happens, the gameplay runs at a fast pace, and the frame rate actually functions for the most part while this is happening. The only real problems I noticed is that the frame rate kind of dies on certain specific arms fortresses fights, and whenever there are frequent explosions on the screen. Again, this didn't ruin my overall experience of the game, but it should be noted that, yeah, this is a 2008 game, and it shows its age in certain regards. The gameplay for Armored Core for Answer is actually pretty complicated, but if I had to sum up the main gameplay loop for Armored Core, I would say it's about building your own personal mech and then seeing how that mech actually performs in combat. This gameplay loop is an addicting series of player experimentation of trial and error. your main goal as a player is to create the ultimate death machine and then become its ace pilot. And so Armored Core has two main aspects to its gameplay: third-person action and the customization that facilitates that action. Both of these things are seamlessly intertwined. Your mech will only play as well as you personally optimized it. This could be a bit of a wall of complexity that will explain why this series has always struggled to gain a foothold in the West. After all, your gameplay in combat will only be as good as you're able to figure out how the customization works, and both of these things are very complex. The first aspect of Armored Core's gameplay I want to get into and break down is the combat. And the reason why I decided to start with combat is because a huge motivational factor for the player to customize their robot is seeing how it actually performs in combat scenario, seeing what works and what doesn't work, and then tweaking their machine accordingly. And to briefly go over Armored Core's combat loop, this is a third-person action shooter with some melee options available. Now, the emphasis is primarily on using ranged weapons, but the player doesn't actually do any manually aiming in this game. The player relies on a lock-on system similar to Dark Souls or Devil May Cry, and while that does sound overpowered, it actually isn't. The other enemy mecha pilots can move so fast in this game, they can actually dash out of your lock-on range. The player has to take advantage of their vast movement options to stay on target to use their weapons effectively. So there's a huge emphasis on movement options in this game, and the movement is all based around boosting and quick boosting. And the player is limited to using a boost meter, but there is fighting game depth in using this system. The player can do a thing called quick boost chaining, which basically, if the player cancels the way they're boosting and heads in a different direction, they can chain these cancels together and basically go wherever the hell they want on the battlefield. They can teleport around like there's some type of anime character. The gameplay just looks ludicrously fast. I haven't mastered this mechanic, but what you're seeing on screen just looks insane to me.
My brains are going into my feet.
And you have to keep in mind that this isn't necessarily the only way you have to play this game. Player freedom is off the charts in Armored Core. You can build a different robot for whatever combat style you're more proficient in. For example, you can build a bigger and bulkier robot that has amazing lock-on that can take advantage of hanging back and using homing missiles. You can build a sniper robot, or you can build a melee robot that gets up close and personal. And since we're on the topic of customization, this is a good time to talk about the second aspect of Armored Core's core gameplay, and that is building, customizing, and optimizing your own personal mecha robot. The options are limitless. Like, this is the most complicated character builder I've seen in any game ever. Like, at a slight glance, the cosmetic options alone are borderline insane. Like, you could just spend 3 hours building your own emblem. Like, there are so many options for designing your own logo, and then you can place that logo anywhere on your robot, and then you can build decals for your robot, and then you could change the color palette, and then you could change the color scheme for every part individually on your robot. Like, it is just insane. You can build your very own fantasy personal robot. It's just crazy. And that's just the cosmetic options alone. When it comes to actually building a robot that performs well into combat, there are a lot of factors that the player has to take into account here. Like, if they want their character to be a giant robot that uses heavy weapons, they're going to need bigger legs for their robot. And then they're going to need to select a generator appropriate for powering a bigger robot. If you put a small generator in a big robot, it won't be enough to move effectively in combat. Likewise, you put a big generator in a small robot, it still won't work good. And then there's different type of boosters you can put on your robot. Like, if you want a machine that flies better, you're going to need to put air boosters in it. If you want a melee build, you're going to need something that has a big forward thrust when you boost into combat. There's so many factors to take into account here. Weight distribution is actually a thing in Armored Core. Like, if your robot has a giant weapon in one arm, it might be off balance. So then you could put stabilizers on the other side of the robot. This is a factor in the game. Like, it's insane that the designers actually decided to put that in the game. And then on top of that, this game has its own jargon and terminology that the player's gonna have to figure out if they want to optimize their robot effectively. Like, I'm not ashamed to admit this. I don't normally need to use a wiki when I play a game, but I had to go to a wiki for this one. I kind of feel like people that couldn't handle Dark Souls on their first playthrough. Hey guys, what's up? I thought I'd just pop in from post-production because I am well aware that Armored Core fans care a lot about the robot building customization mechanics. And let's be honest here, this is my first Armored Core game, and I've probably made a mistake somewhere along the way in describing those mechanics, but I don't think that detracts from my overall point in the video, that the whole fun to be had in the game is the trial and error process, learning about what works and what doesn't work. You're kind of like a mechanic working on a passion project in your garage. That's the kind of vibe I get when I play this game. My only real criticism is that the game doesn't really properly explain the way things work or how its jargon operates. I mean, the game just flat out admits how to quick turn, and that is an essential aspect of this game's combat. Well, back to the review. So what we got here are two different walls of complexity. There's the complexity in building and optimizing your own personal robot, and then there's the complexity of actually using that robot in combat scenarios. But I gotta say, if you can get over both of those hurdles, you'll be rewarded with one of the most complex and addicting gameplay loops I have ever played in any game ever. In this game's single-player mode, the player will be presented with missions that have problems that will test the player's ability to customize a robot that can tackle said problems, and then their ability to actually pilot that machine in combat scenarios. For example, you might be placed in a mission where you have to destroy an arms fortress that's sitting in the sky, so you'll have to build a robot that can actually fly well and handle well in the air. Or maybe you'll be in a mission where you have to destroy hordes of enemies. In that case, you'll maybe want a bigger or more bulkier robot that can take more damage and carry bigger or more heavier weapons. And let's just say you've built your own personal death machine that can take on any other mech on one-on-one combat. You might be presented with somebody that has an alternate build that just wrecks your machine. So you'll be put in a scenario where you'll have to bring your mech back to the garage, optimize it, and tweak it. And then you'll be rewarded when you actually see that machine perform well in combat. You know, this is my first Armored Core game, and when I went through it, I had to get over 3 different stages. At first, I was hit with 2 different walls of complexity that required 2 radically different skill sets, but once I got over those walls, once I began to understand what worked and what didn't work, I was rewarded with one of the most addicting forms of gameplay that I didn't know I needed in my life.
Confirmed. The answerer has been destroyed. Mission complete. So, this is the beginning of the end. You think it'll be easy?